The pouring rain lashed against the gridlocked street. Inside the gleaming car, the air was suffocating. Grace, her face pale with exhaustion, leaned her head back against the seat, but every word she uttered was torn apart by the man beside her. Brian, the man she once trusted, showed no concern for her well-being. His gaze was fixed solely on the bloodstains seeping into the seat. "You've stained my car. It's difficult to wash. Do you know that?" His voice was cold as steel, each word a thrown knife. Grace, clutching her cramping stomach, tried to explain that she was sick. Her period had come unexpectedly, and she hadn't been prepared. But instead of a comforting hand, she received a look of contempt, as if her very existence was a burden. She tried to explain, "It's just, I'm tired. Let me clean it." But he cut her off, blaming her for the rain, for wearing too many layers, and for the fact that she dared to have her period on his precious car seat. The rain hammered against the glass. He slammed on the brakes and ordered, "Get out. Clean it up." He stepped out, yanked her door open, and slammed it shut again. She stumbled, her shoes soaked, her breathing ragged, a sharp pain coursing through her abdomen. Above her was the rain. In front of her was the night, and behind her was a door that had locked away both love and dignity. She fell to her knees, crying and trembling, feeling the cold seep into every fiber of her being. In Brian's eyes, there was no pity, only annoyance and frustration, because his precious car was more valuable than the woman he had once promised to love. In that moment, Grace understood her love had become a chain. The man who had once been sweet was now a verbal abuser, prioritizing material things and reputation over her very survival. The cramping pain in her stomach, her exhausted body, and her stinging eyes from the rain mixed with tears all marked the beginning of an irreparable fracture. On that rainy night, when Brian indifferently slammed the car door shut and left her to collapse by the roadside, the seed of rebellion was sown in Grace's heart. A seemingly strong relationship began to crack, opening a series of tear-soaked days where she would have to choose to continue enduring or to reclaim her self-worth. A moment later, a black car stopped in front of Grace. It was Jake, accompanied by his mother. They helped the drenched girl inside and took her to the hospital, lying on the stark white hospital bed. The doctor diagnosed her with blood deficiency, recommending medication and rest. Jake's mother placed a warm cup of medicine in her hand. "Drink this, you'll feel better." Her calm voice and kind eyes made Grace's throat tighten. She timidly said, "If the car got dirty, I'll pay for the cleaning. I'm sorry." But the woman just smiled gently. "Washing a car is nothing. Every girl has a day like this." For a brief moment, Grace felt a sense of comfort. This was perhaps the first time she had received such sympathy from his family. But that moment quickly vanished. The gentle moment was immediately shattered by the ringing phone. Brian's voice rang out, cold and accusatory. "My mother came specifically today to discuss the dowry. What are you pretending for? Come back now." Grace was stunned. She was sitting in a hospital, her body exhausted, her mind in turmoil, and on the other end of the line, he was talking about marriage as if it were a negotiation. Not a word of concern, just talk of money, dowry, and her obligations. She answered softly, her voice trembling but resolute. "I don't need you to discuss my dowry. That is no longer relevant." But he snarled, his voice full of malice. "Stop being so fake. Grace, you have half an hour to get back. We have a wedding, invitations, and our family's reputations to uphold." Grace closed her eyes, her heart sinking. Reputation, money, dowry, all were more important to Brian than love, than her. In that moment, she knew for sure this relationship was over. Footsteps echoed in the hospital hallway. Jake appeared, a familiar face from a distant past. Grace's eyes widened in surprise as old memories came flooding back. Before she could even say hello, her phone vibrated. Brian's mother's voice shrieked with fury. "That car is my son's. The money for the house renovations is also ours. You wasted his youth. Now you have to pay it all back. Every single penny. Grace bit her lip. She knew the car was a gift from her own mother and that she had paid for the house renovations. Yet, in the woman's mouth, it had all become a dowry she was now being forced to repay. She responded, her voice trembling but firm. This car is in my name. I renovated the house myself. By what right can you demand it back? On the other end of the line, the shouting exploded like thunder. Don't play dumb. Do you think you can just leave my son now? The betrothal gifts have been given. My son won't give you anything back. Do you dare to call the police? Jake sat on the hospital bed, handed Grace a glass of water, and comforted her. Don't be sad. In that moment, fear turned into determination. She turned to Jake, her eyes blazing with strength. She wanted him to go with her to the police station. At the police station, the air was thick with tension. Brian and his mother were already there, their eyes full of contempt. Before Grace could even state her case, his mother's harsh voice rang out. She pointed at Grace. You uncultured brat! How dare you call the police on my son? The police officer sitting opposite them spoke in a steady voice that landed like a hammer blow. The car's registration is in Grace's name. This is her legal property. Brian and his mother had no choice but to return the car keys, not forgetting to hurl insults before leaving the station. The scene shifted to a car wash. Sitting next to Jake, Grace let out a sad laugh. My wedding was supposed to be in 3 days, but now it's all over. I'll have to cancel it. A car wash employee approached and handed her a USB drive he'd found in the car, with trembling hands. Grace plugged it in and the screen lit up with images of Brian kissing another woman, his hideous smile, his vile laughter. Her heart squeezed tight. She suddenly burst into laughter, but it was a laugh filled with rage. Let's go. Jake, I just thought of a way to get all this out of my system. In the house she once shared with Brian, Grace held a large hammer. With one strike, the TV screen shattered. Smash it all, she screamed. Just pretend this TV is your ex-girlfriend. In the house that was once a home, Grace stood with her arms crossed, watching as workers carried out each item, everything from the dining table and the sofa to the refrigerator she had bought with her own hard-earned money. Brian's mother appeared, her face red, shouting loudly, You're taking everything. You're ungrateful. This is the betrothal gift my son gave you. You can't take a single cent. Grace turned her back, remaining silent as if she hadn't heard a thing. The angrier the woman got, the more her voice shrieked. Just then, Brian walked in, his eyes full of fury. If you want to take all the stuff, you have to give me back 1 million yuan. That's my family's dowry money. Grace just curled her lip, a cold, faint smile on her face. No argument, no justification, just pure contempt in her eyes. She ordered the movers to turn everything. Whatever couldn't be taken, they were to smash. Brian and his mother continued their verbal abuse, their degrading and cursing words raining down on her. But this time, she didn't shed a single tear. At the company, Grace sat in a meeting room with Jake. When she heard him introduce his title, she was stunned. It turned out Jake was the CEO her father had mentioned many times. Suddenly, a miserable wail echoed from the hallway. Brian's mother burst in, screaming and rolling on the floor in front of the employees. This girl stole all our betrothal money. We paid 600,000 yuan to renovate the house. And now she's destroying everything. The employees whispered, their eyes full of suspicion. The whispers turned into attacks. Surrounded by pressure, Grace stood tall. And then, without another second of hesitation, she took the glass of water from the table and threw it straight at the woman's face. The cold water splashed, the whispers went silent, and the entire office froze. The taunts and attacks continued. A female colleague named Vanessa stood out, arms crossed, with a look of disdain. I also saw her in an old man's car the other day. I wonder how many men she's been a mistress for. Grace let out a contemptuous laugh. She opened her phone and projected the video she had gotten from the USB drive. The screen clearly showed Brian passionately kissing Vanessa. The entire company was in shock. The whispers turned around, and the scornful looks were now directed at Vanessa. She went crazy, rushing forward to slap Grace. Jake immediately stepped in, blocking her and pushing her away. Just then, Brian and the company director walked in. Vanessa panicked, pointing and falsely accusing. It was this old director who was with Grace. But she didn't know. That director was Grace's father. The room erupted when he slammed the table. Enraged. What? Why would I be having an affair with my own daughter? The entire company went silent. Brian hung his head, his face pale with shame. The director glared at him as if he wanted to devour him whole. Vanessa was frozen in place, stunned, with nothing left to cling to. Brian dragged his mother out, leaving a stunned office behind them, where the truth had been exposed. Grace held her head high like someone who had just escaped the chains of deceit. Grace's father announced that Jake was the new company director. Vanessa was fired immediately. Just then, Grace received a message and rushed out. In a quiet coffee shop, Grace faced Brian. He lowered his voice, his demeanor seemingly gentle, but every word he uttered reeked of shamelessness. If you give me 500,000, I'll forgive you. We can act like nothing ever happened. Grace let out a contemptuous laugh. She picked up the cold glass of water in front of her and decisively splashed it in his face. The water splattered, and his eyes went red with humiliation. Brian roared, his hand gripping Grace's arm, but in that very moment, Jake appeared. He walked over, his face cold, grabbed Brian's wrist, and twisted it behind his back, making him break out in a cold sweat from the pain. In the eyes of everyone around, Grace stood up and her voice echoed loudly. Jake is the new director of the company. Your position there is as good as gone. The two of them held hands and left, their eyes full of love. Behind them, Brian stood frozen, his eyes red with hatred, his hand still trembling from pain and anger. At a luxurious villa, Jake took Grace home. He opened the door to a large room he had prepared. Inside were dolls and a full set of amenities. Every delicate detail proved his thoughtfulness. He also presented her with assets and the promises his mother had made years ago, giving it all to Grace as proof that everything belonged to her. His eyes met hers, his voice warm and firm. I've never had a girlfriend. In my heart, there's only you, forever. A simple declaration of love, but as solid as a rock. In another room, Brian and his mother sat whispering and scheming, their greedy faces lit up with a sick confidence. She has to give us back 500,000. They laughed hollowly, their scheming eyes mixed with ambition, preparing for their next plan. The wedding day arrived. Fresh flowers lined the aisle, and the lights were brilliant. But the groom wasn't Brian. It was Jake. He held Grace's hand as they greeted their friends, beaming with happiness. Only Brian and his mother were still hiding in their old house, putting on nice clothes and happily laughing because they thought Brian was the groom today. However, his friend called to tell him that Jake was the one who was chosen. The two of them's faces changed. Their anger was clear, and they planned to crash the wedding, unwilling to let go. The melodic music played, and sparkling flower petals fell. Grace and Jake walked hand in hand down the aisle, radiant smiles on both their faces. Friends and colleagues applauded endlessly, congratulating the couple. Under the shimmering lights, they swore to be together forever, holding each other's hands tightly. But just as the atmosphere of happiness was at its peak, the wedding hall doors burst open. Brian and his mother stormed in, their faces full of malice. A shrill voice rang out, "You shameless woman! She ruined my son, stole all the dowry, and now she's putting on a fake wedding to swindle money and gifts from everyone." The entire hall buzzed, bewildered eyes turning to the bride. Grace's mother was furious and tried to rush over, but she was held back by relatives. Amidst the chaos, Grace remained calm. She took a step forward, her voice resonating throughout the wedding hall. Today, I will make everything clear. The so-called dowry they talk about was only 10,000 yuan, but they were greedy and brazenly demanded 1 million. My car, they claimed was theirs. My card, my money, they took it all. Brian even used my connections to get a promotion. I endured it time and time again, and all I got in return was coldness and humiliation. Her words were like hammer blows, striking Brian and his mother. The crowd was stunned, beginning to whisper to one another. Brian, his face red with humiliation, roared, "I'll ruin this wedding." He grabbed the wedding photo hanging on the altar and snapped it in front of everyone. The sound of the frame breaking was loud as he shouted, "You're the traitor! As soon as we broke up, you were quick to marry this man!" The atmosphere was chaotic. But Grace did not waver. She turned, held Jake's hand tightly, her eyes shining brightly. "Our love doesn't need justification. I have nothing more to say to your lies." Brian and his mother were still standing there, still screaming, shamelessly refusing to leave, turning the wedding into a chaotic battlefield right in front of all the guests. The wedding atmosphere was already chaotic. Now it was at a breaking point. Brian's mother suddenly pulled a piece of paper from her bag, held it up, and pointed it at Grace's face, hissing, "She's pregnant with Brian's child, and yet she brazenly stands here marrying someone else to deceive everyone." The entire hall went silent. Whispers erupted. Everyone was in shock. Everyone's eyes were focused on the bride. Jake's mother's face went pale. She turned to her son, her voice full of displeasure. "Jake, be sensible. I cannot accept my son raising someone else's child." Jake calmly advised his mother to not worry, to trust Grace. There was a moment of silence. Then she seemed to remember a few days ago. Grace was hospitalized for an irregular period. That meant there was no way she could be pregnant right now. Her expression softened, her eyes growing gentle. Meanwhile, Brian and his mother laughed triumphantly, as if they had the upper hand. Not only that, they shamelessly demanded more 5 million yuan. "You have to compensate us with an additional 5 million, and only then will we let this go." Grace stood tall, her eyes calm. She picked up her phone, dialed a number, and said softly, "Do you want to come to our wedding?" Some guests sighed in frustration, shaking their heads and leaving as the wedding had turned into a joke. But Grace did not waver. She looked straight at Brian and his mother, her voice firm. "Today, you two will definitely pay the price." Just then, the door burst open. An unexpected person appeared, Vanessa. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with anger. Before anyone could react, Vanessa snatched the test paper from Brian's mother's hand and screamed, "This is my child. The baby in my womb is mine, and Brian's." The entire hall was stunned. Brian's mother froze for a moment. Then her face changed color, showing her frustration at having her plan ruined. Brian's eyes widened. Flustered, What are you saying? Are you 100% sure this is my child?" Vanessa looked at him, all her pent-up hatred pouring out. She slapped Brian directly, a stinging blow, immediately after. Vanessa clutched her stomach and fell to her knees in intense pain. The baby in her womb caused her to collapse right in the middle of the wedding. In a warm room, Grace and Jake sat next to each other, holding hands, their eyes radiant. They talked about the wedding, about how Brian and his mother were humiliated in front of everyone. Jake pondered for a moment. "I'm just worried that they'll try to get revenge." Grace chuckled, a gentle laugh. "Don't worry about it." She took out 2 plane tickets and held them up in front of him. "A honeymoon. That's what we need. Forget all the bad things that happened." At the entrance of the villa, Brian's mother appeared again, wailing and demanding to be let in. But the security guard stopped her. Just then, Grace and her husband returned. The woman lunged at them, her voice shrill. "Vanessa miscarried. It's all your fault. You have to take responsibility." Grace stood tall, her eyes cold. "You brought this upon yourselves. Your son is greedy and heartless, and it's your fault for not raising him right. If you hadn't shamelessly come to ruin my wedding, this wouldn't have happened. From now on, don't bother my life anymore." The woman was stunned, but still gnashed her teeth in hatred. Brian, flustered, made an excuse to take a phone call and quietly slipped away. In the long, cold hallway, he sat slumped over, his voice full of bitterness. "A woman who can't bear children, I will never marry her." When his mother came, the two of them didn't go back to the hospital room, leaving Vanessa to pry herself into unconsciousness alone. At a place for those who want to date, Brian's mother carefully wrote an introduction paper and presented it to the girls. "My son is 1.8 meters tall, used to be a financial manager, and requires a dowry of 1 million yuan." But the only reaction was bitter laughter. Everyone who read his profile saw that he was unemployed and demanded a ridiculous betrothal gift, sneered and shook their heads before walking away. Brian stood up in frustration, wanting to leave. His mother still held him back. "You have to call Grace and make up with her. Only by getting back with her can we get everything back." In his desperation, he picked up the phone to call Grace. But on the other end, Grace was enjoying her honeymoon with Jake, her face full of happiness. Seeing the familiar number, she did not hesitate. She hung up and blocked his number forever. Brian and his mother were stunned, feeling defeated. But after a few seconds, their eyes lit up with malice. The mother whispered, "It's okay. We'll figure out another way." After the honeymoon, Jake and Grace returned. As they reached the gate, they met a middle-aged man, the Bryan family's servant. He bowed and said timidly, "Miss Grace, Mr. Brian regrets everything. He truly loves you and doesn't believe that wedding was real. He said he'll give you 100,000 yuan as a dowry." Grace gave a bitter laugh and told him the truth. "He once paid 10,000 yuan, but forced my family to pay 1 million. That's the truth. Now, he's offering me 100,000, which means I would have to pay 10 million yuan. You could call this a robbery." The butler was stunned, his face turning red with shame because he himself didn't know. He stammered, unable to speak, then made an excuse to leave, leaving behind the humiliation for his master. Unwilling to give up, Brian pretended to be insane. He went to find Grace's acquaintances, crying and telling them his woes. When Grace appeared, he rushed forward timidly, his mouth stammering his pleas. But in response, a stinging slap landed on his face. He still tried to hold on, feigning a collapse, complaining that he was hungry and suffering, hoping to gain her sympathy. But Grace coldly turned away. "This is the consequence you have to bear. I no longer pity you." In the apartment hallway, Brian and his mother were timidly eating because they were playing the part of a suffering family. All their actions and words were being watched by Grace via surveillance camera. "Just pretend to be poor and she'll soften up, then she'll come back to you." The two of them continued to delude themselves with this sick scenario. But Grace had already seen through them. She just quietly told Jake, "Call security, get them out of here." Immediately after, security guards arrived and dragged Brian and his mother, who were lying on the stairs, out of the gate, back at their house. Brian angrily threw and shattered dishes, the pieces flying everywhere. His mother cried and complained. In the midst of their madness, the two of them started to have a heated argument. "If you weren't so greedy, I would have everything now," he roared, his eyes red. She also fought back, blaming her son. The two greedy people were now blaming each other for the evil they had done. But in the end, Brian lost control and directly kicked his mother out, leaving her to sob alone in the dark. Unexpectedly, Vanessa came to Grace's house. Tears streamed down her face, her voice shaky. "Do you know where that bastard, Brian, is? I lost the baby, and then Brian abandoned me. My life is ruined. Do you know where he is?" Grace shook her head. Vanessa bit her lip, wiped her tears, and left, Looking at her haggard figure, Grace sighed, a hint of sympathy in her eyes. Jake walked over and gently squeezed his wife's hand. In an interview room, Brian sat across from the interviewer, his face full of confidence. The interviewer looked at his resume and coldly pushed it back. "Our company does not need a person with such poor morals as you. You will affect our image." Those words were like a blade, cutting deep into his pride. Brian gnashed his teeth, slammed his hand on the table, said a few words, and stormed out. On the street, his phone rang loudly. It was the bank, calling to remind him of his credit card debt, demanding that he pay immediately. He froze, a cold sweat breaking out, his mind a mess. In his desperation, he tried to call his mother for money. At the Bryan family's house, Vanessa unexpectedly appeared. Only Brian's mother was home. Vanessa's voice trembled. "How is he? Did he call you? Where is he?" The greedy woman just laughed hollowly, her voice full of contempt. "You are a woman who can no longer bear children. Giving you money would be like throwing it into a river. Brian was so unlucky to meet you. Someone with no self-respect and who doesn't love themselves like you has no purpose in life." Vanessa was stunned, her eyes filled with hatred, but she could only remain silent and turn away. The next day at the company, Grace was unexpectedly stopped. Brian appeared, looking disheveled and desperate. He knelt down, clutching her legs, begging for forgiveness. But Grace did not flinch. She spoke in a firm voice, making sure everyone around her could hear clearly. "This is the ungrateful man who made me waste 2 years of my youth loving him. This is the stupid man who betrayed my trust. This is also the heartless man who made Vanessa lose her right to be a mother." Then 3 stinging slaps landed on his face, 3 slaps representing the 3 pains Grace had to endure. Brian stumbled back, his face red with pain and humiliation. He still tried to grab her hand and cried out, "If you don't forgive me, I'll go to the street and kill myself immediately." Grace just curled her lip. "If you want to, go ahead. I don't care anymore." He rushed outside, lay down in the street, and cried as if he had just been hit by a car. But everyone around could see clearly he was not injured at all. It was all an act. Grace coldly ordered, "Security, take him away." His screaming voice was dragged away in vain, no one feeling pity for him anymore. Only his greedy mother came, wailing for her useless son and calling a doctor for him. That evening, back at home, Brian lay slumped on the sofa, his eyes empty. His mother tremblingly held out a credit card, which had only a small amount of money left. He glanced at it, then threw it aside, contemptuous of how little it was. Night fell. In a dimly lit, abandoned house, Brian sat drinking beer with 2 young men who looked like gangsters. His eyes were red, his voice full of hatred. "There's only one way. Kidnap Grace, so we can be together forever and never be apart." The 2 gangsters laughed loudly because they were about to get 30% of the commission from the kidnapping. The 3 of them clinked glasses happily. In that moment, the darkness in Brian's soul was fully revealed. A complete failure now only had the ambition for revenge. In her room, Grace sat in front of her dressing table, looking at herself in the mirror. Today was Jake's birthday. She said to herself, "I can't be late." In the basement, Jake was already waiting in the car. But suddenly, the figures of Brian and 2 other men darted past. Their suspicious appearance made him wary. He got out and quietly followed them, and overheard their conversation. Their main purpose was to kidnap Grace and blackmail her family. Just then, Grace appeared from a distance. The 3 men were about to rush forward. Jake quickly stepped in front of her. He faced the 3 of them alone, his face still calm and composed. With just a few moves, he knocked the 2 thugs down, on the cold cement floor. Jake was taken away by them. Grace walked over, couldn't find her husband, and only found his familiar wallet. Her heart pounded, a bad feeling in her gut. She immediately called the police and rushed to look for him. In the abandoned house, Jake was tightly tied up, A bucket of water was thrown at his face, waking him up. In front of him, Brian's eyes were wild as he snarled each word. "I will take back everything I lost. I will not accept defeat. You are just a scoundrel who took advantage of the situation to steal Grace from me." Jake responded, his voice full of contempt. "And you're just a coward, resorting to kidnapping to cling to a dead love." Brian furiously lunged at Jake and started hitting him. His face now looked like that of a lunatic. Just then, Grace appeared, carrying a suitcase full of money. She screamed, "Take this and get out of here! Let Jake go! And don't bother my life anymore." But Brian was now like a madman. He forcefully threw the suitcase of money away. His voice echoed with an obsessive tone. "I don't need money. What else do you want? I want you. I want you to love me with all your heart." Grace's tears welled up as she tried to reason with him. "Stop before it's too late. You've lost everything. Don't ruin yourself anymore." In the damp, abandoned house, the yellow light flickered. Brian had almost completely gone mad. He turned to look at Jake, his eyes red with hatred. "It's all because of you. You took everything from me and made me miserable like this," he roared, then suddenly pulled out a knife and held it to Jake's throat. The cold blade gleamed in the darkness. He turned to Grace, his voice trembling but full of threat. "If you don't promise to be with me, I'll kill him right here." Grace froze, her eyes wide, trying to stay calm. "Brian, stop!" He was suspicious, his eyes wild. Suddenly, he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a divorce agreement. He threw it at her and snarled, "Sign it! Sign it right now. Only when you sign will we be together again." Grace was stunned, her hands trembling. He continued to pressure her, screaming, "Hit him for me!" The two thugs immediately rushed in, landing brutal punches on the tied-up Jake. The sound of impacts echoed throughout the house. Grace's tears welled up as she shakily picked up the pen. The moment seemed to freeze, but unexpectedly, she gritted her teeth, turned the pen, and stabbed it straight into Brian's chest. "Ah!" he screamed in pain, staggering back. Just then, Jake had managed to untie himself. He jumped up and rushed to stop Brian's desperate swing of the knife at Grace. The two men wrestled fiercely. The door burst open. The police stormed in with a shout, and the three men quickly fled. In the abandoned house, Grace tightly hugged Jake, her face still panicked. But her eyes shone with a new resolve. She had narrowly escaped the jaws of death. In the dark night, Brian stumbled home with a wound, his body covered in blood, his breathing ragged. The police were in hot pursuit, but he still ran, rushing to his dilapidated house. In his madness, he screamed at his mother, "It's all your fault! Why aren't you rich? Why are you just a lowly peasant? Why did you give birth to me in this miserable life?" The mother collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face, sobbing, "Let me turn myself in. I'll say that I forced you to do all these wrong things. At least you'll have a chance to start over." In the hospital, Grace handed a glass of water to Jake as he rested on the bed. Fortunately, he was not seriously injured. The two of them accidentally read the news. The person who turned themselves in was Brian's mother, not him. They were both slightly stunned. Jake frowned slightly. "That means he's still out there. You have to be extremely careful." In another location, Vanessa just opened her door when Brian rushed at her from behind. He hugged her tightly, his voice trembling. "Vanessa, only you understand me. Help me, please." She was startled, pushed him away, and slapped him directly. "I'd rather die than help a man who ruined my life like you." Brian's eyes turned red. He furiously grabbed Vanessa's neck and roared, "If you don't help me, we'll die together." In that critical moment, the police stormed in. Brian panicked and ran, escaping into the night. In a gloomy alley, Brian huddled, his face filled with malice, muttering like a madman, "It's all Grace's fault. I'll make her pay." The next day, As Grace was about to go out, Jake gave her a self-defense spray. She smiled and nodded, but she never imagined that nearby, Brian was already waiting in ambush. He stepped out, his eyes full of madness. "These past few days, I've lived in hell. It's all because of you. You ruined my life." Her phone to call the police, but he quickly snatched it and smashed it on the ground. Outside, Brian's screams echoed as he blamed both his mother and poured his hatred onto Grace. In a split second, she quickly raised the spray and sprayed it directly in his face, then turned and ran. But after only a few steps, he got back up and chased after her like a madman. The knife in his hand swung, rushing forward. In that life-and-death moment, Vanessa suddenly appeared. She screamed and rushed forward, using her body to block Grace. "Ah!" The fatal stab hit Vanessa. She fell to the ground, blood staining her clothes. At the same time, Jake rushed over, knocked Brian down, and held him to the ground. Grace burst into tears, holding Vanessa in her arms. Her breathing was weak, her lips trembling. Vanessa whispered, "I'm sorry, everyone." Then Vanessa's eyes closed, her body slowly going cold amidst the heartbreaking sobs. The police arrived, handcuffing Brian, accompanied by his insane screams. Under the heavy rain, Jake stood outside, waiting for Grace, holding an umbrella for her as she got into the car. The scene was a complete contrast to that day when she was abandoned in the rain by Brian. In the car, they looked at each other, their eyes filled with gentle love. A faint smile appeared on Grace's lips. She was certain that after everything, she had chosen the right man to spend the rest of her life with.